Hey, I'm Ben Avery, and this is Strangers and Aliens from strangersandaliens.com. What's Strangers and Aliens? Well, Strangers and Aliens is an audio podcast and occasional video series about the intersection of science fiction and fantasy and faith and Christianity and how they all kind of just mix together. And this particular series is what I'm calling Is It Worth Reading? And the reason I'm calling it Is It Worth Reading is because I'm asking the question, is it worth reading? And I'm taking a look at and exploring Christian sci-fi books and stories. And I just got done doing a whole thing about the C.S. Lewis space trilogy. And this is going to be the last time I do a C.S. Lewis episode of Is It Worth Reading for a while. That's if I do more Is It Worth Reading. Although after I did that Hideous Strength, the third book in the series, I wasn't sure if I was going to come back to this or not. And here I am. I'm back. And so today's book is kind of an addendum to the space trilogy. And it is The Dark Tower. The Dark Tower. Not to be confused with Browning's poem. I think it was Browning, right? English major here. Not to be confused with Stephen King's huge, epic fantasy horror thing that he did. It's very different and much, much shorter. So what's the deal with Is It Worth Reading? I'm going to answer it with a yes or a no. Is it worth reading? And I'm going to explore the answer by also talking about, is it good science fiction? Is it good Christian literature? Is it good homework where you feel like you should read it because you need to read it? I would say that, A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy would be science fiction homework. It's something that every science fiction fan should read at some point or another, just to have an awareness of what's going on in science fiction. Now, there's thousands upon thousands of science fiction books, and some have risen to the top in that way. Whether you like it or not, it's up there. The same with like the movie 2001, I think, is science fiction homework. If you're a science fiction fan and you have not seen 2001, I'd say just find 2 hours of your life, sit down in front of the TV and watch it. Although some parts you could just fast forward through it. I do know that Evan, my co-host on the audio podcast, Strangers and Aliens, hates the movie, hated it. I watched it with him, and it was almost more fun to watch him than it was to watch the movie. But anyway, The Dark Tower. The Dark Tower is a book fragment, and it's interesting because it does show how the Ransom trilogy could have gone in a much different direction if The Dark Tower had been what C.S. Lewis actually ended up finishing and publishing. But he didn't, and instead we get this beautiful trilogy about 3 different planets and the battle, the battle between the forces of good and the forces of evil, the cosmic battle just against the forces of sin and evil. I don't know where this would have gone if this had been the direction that he ended up going in. But my answer, I'm just going to go ahead and answer this question real quick to Is It Worth Reading? My answer is no, yes, maybe. Really, my yes definitely hinges on this would be C.S. Lewis homework. This is, you've read the space trilogy, you've enjoyed it. You probably are going to read Perelandra again. You might even read the other ones again. I don't know what your personal tastes are going to be like. But this then comes around and you're like, well, it's about Ransom. Ransom is in this book. It's called The Dark Tower. And it is, though, it's fragments. There's actually portions of the book where it just stops. There is a character in here who does show up in that Hideous Strength, McPhee, but as you're reading it, there's portions where they couldn't read the handwritten notes, or the notes were lost. There's a controversy that goes with this book that someone published a couple books about how there was a conspiracy that the Dark Tower and the other fragment in this book, After 10 Years, I think is what it's called, and that he didn't actually write them, that this guy Walter Hooper, who says he rescued them from the burn pile after C.S. Lewis died, that he actually wrote them and was trying to do something to get more, I don't know, clout, fame, whatever it might be. Those books I read, this one It's by Catherine Lindskog, and it's called The C.S. Lewis Hoax. And I read that in high school, and it did cause me to second guess this, but I do think now that he wrote it. But the point is, this is homework. It's unfulfilling, and it's honestly not the best writing. I mean, this is first draft stuff, and I don't care how good of a writer you are, your first draft may be great, but it's not going to be your best draft ever. You just need to have other eyeballs on it, people reading it, yourself. You need to just have someone else read it. And so this is early draft stuff, and honestly, I can see why C.S. Lewis abandoned it. I feel like that he was going, I think he knew where he was going, but I don't think he liked necessarily where he was going. So he abandoned this, and instead of this, we got Paralandra, and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that if this was the second book in the series, it would not be one of my favorite books of all time. And I am very glad and very thankful that this is the book that God put on C.S. Lewis's heart. This is the book that C.S. Lewis published. This is the book that got out there, and this is a book that has affected me personally and many, many, many people around the world. So, The Dark Tower, is it worth reading? Yes. This is homework, though. Now, there are some short stories in here, and there's also some background about the Dark Tower. So this particular volume has The Man Born Blind, The Shoddy Lands, Ministering Angels, and Forms of Things Unknown. What's interesting about the Forms of Things Unknown and Ministering Angels, those are both short stories that were published in these magazines, these pulp sci-fi magazines. And these are the kinds of things that actually inspired C.S. Lewis, I think, to write the science fiction that he did write. I know that these kind of science fiction magazines are what inspired him to write The Great Divorce, because he read a story in a magazine, a British sci-fi magazine, that inspired the kind of the big concept behind The Great Divorce. So those stories are also in this book, and I think that there are a couple different ways you can buy these things. But yeah. So that is my answer to is it worth reading. Now, your mileage may vary, but I definitely think that the only reason to pick this up might be because you've read the other stuff and you want more, and this gives you a little insight into what more could have been. But it isn't. This is a what if, not a what was. So I want to thank you for spending time with me, and head over to strangersandaliens.com. We've done some episodes about the Space Trilogy. We probably will do an episode about the Dark Tower, so that means I probably will be rereading the Dark Tower sometime in the near future. Not exactly looking forward to it, but I am looking forward to talking about it with Steve on the podcast. So until next time, Godspeed.